This episode is to the one who has lost a loved one. But I'm just so honored to sit down with you. He also has his entire story in a separate video from this. We're going to have that link down below, and I encourage you to go watch it. It really will change your life. You talked about when you were a child not really having answers for death given to you. Do you feel like you were confronted with the same issues when your wife passed away for your own children, watching them walk through that and not really having the answers?
Yes and no. I know when my dad died, as we mentioned on the video, that I was 7 years old at the time. And I didn't know a lot of things about anything, and it was death. Of course, everybody knows what death is, but when it happens to you like that, you don't have the answers, because I was 7. I didn't know the answers.
Right.
But when my children's mother passed away, I didn't have the answers to why she died, but I had the answers for my kids when they asked why she died, if that makes any sense.
For sure.
Because they had the same questions I had when I was 7. Of course, Hillary was 16, Laura was 11 when her mother passed away. And they didn't understand it. And I didn't, but I knew how to talk to them about it because I had gone through it myself.
What things did you say to them in the time?
Well, there's that question that's asked, that people ask all the time when you have something traumatic happen. And they look at God and they go, why?
Right.
Why does God do this? And it helped me find the answer, because there's not one. Because I don't question what God allows to happen. God didn't take my dad. God didn't take my wife. It's life. It happened. So there's not an answer to why. The answer is that God is on his throne. He knows what's best. His knowledge and his love is greater than anything that's happened to you. And what I was able to tell my children, because of what I learned losing my father, was that we'll get through this because God loves us. He didn't take her for any reason. She had cancer. It was the cancer that took her. And that's just happens sometimes. But what I was able to tell them was, we'll get through it together because we got God on our side. And so I couldn't answer why she died, but I gave them the answers on how to deal with it, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I think that people really struggle with, does God, we use the terminology, God took them home.
Yeah.
He called them home, he took them home. If God takes people home or calls them home, or some people think, the enemy took them out, or, because we live in a fallen world, because we live in a fallen world that cancer exists or whatever. So I think people really struggle with, why God? Why did you do this? And we put all the blame because he's in supreme control.
Yeah.
God, you could have stopped this. You could have healed this person, but you didn't. And why?
Well, I look at the circumstances, and you got to look at it realistically. Because like I said, God doesn't take people home. Now, in Pam's case, you could argue that he took her home, because our prayer was that he cured her cancer. And at first when she died, I didn't think he did. I didn't think he answered my prayer.
Yeah.
But then when I thought about it, yes, he cured her cancer.
Totally.
Because he took her home. But I think, like in my dad's case, and Mother told me this years later. I didn't know it at the time, and it was years later that I was talking to Mother about it, and we lost her in 2019. But she lived a good life, lived to be 84. But she told me that Dad had the heart of an 80-year-old man. So they had to do open heart surgery. Now, did God give my dad an 80-year-old heart? No. That's just the circumstances. It's just living. Some of us, and I consider myself blessed because I have no health problems. You know, I'm 69 years old, and the doctor told me one day I'd live to be 100. You know, he said not nursing home years, but I mean, I'm blessed in that way.
Yeah.
But not everybody gets to be blessed that way, because it's living that creates things that causes other things.
Right.
But so you don't blame life happening on God, because God gives us free will. You know, if smoking gives you cancer, God doesn't, he didn't invent cigarettes. You know, you choose to smoke, for example. And that's maybe a bad example, but so what you've got to learn, and this is what I learned through Dad dying, and it's what I learned through my kids passing away, is that what do I learn from this? How do I grow from this? And you're not going to grow unless you make a partnership with God.
For sure.
Because you can't do it by yourself. That's one thing I learned trying to raise two kids after their mother passed away. I can't do this by myself. First time I ever taught Sunday school, I was bad uncomfortable. And then I go, well, I can't, because I'm trying to do it without God. You know, and then I say, okay, God, tell me how to do this. And he said, be yourself. And that's what I've always tried to do. So.
What would you tell a father or mother that's lost their spouse who has children in the home still? Like, how could you encourage that parent with the things to say to their children? What did you say to your kids that helped in the grieving processing process?
Well, to me, that's easier than you think it is, because experience can play a lot into what you tell people. And give you an example, get away from the children a little bit, but after I retired, I came across this job. It was supposed to be 15 hours a week, and it turned into 30-something hours a week, and I eventually didn't do it anymore, but it was delivering medical equipment. And I've actually had the opportunity when I go into places, and I went in a guy's house one time over at Lexington delivering something, and his wife just had passed away. And he said, I don't know what to do. And it gave me an opportunity at that point to minister. Because what I told my children, what I told that man, I said, wrap the people around you that love you. Take that love and wrap yourself in it, because those people are still here. And then I go back to what we was talking about earlier. God doesn't allow, he allows death, but he doesn't cause death. And you've got to realize that one day, as Paul said, to be with you is gain. But what I would tell people is, you're still here. You've got to live your life. And you can't live your life to the fullest if you don't include God in it. So don't get mad at God. Say, God, I need your help. And I told the kids, I said, we're still here. We'll cherish your mother forever, but we've got to move on. We've got to live our lives. And the story, I have ministered to people that have lost a spouse, and they say, how do you deal with it? And the thing that I tell them is, I said, I never, ever want to forget. But what you have to learn to do, and the example I use is, I have a closet over here. And I take those memories and I put it in that closet. I go live my life, but every now and then, I go back to that closet, because I have to. Because I don't want to forget, because it was an important part of my life. But I have to live my life. And I had to take care of those children. You know, they needed me. And I'm still here. So I've got to get my act straight, because they need me worse than I need to grieve. So in a sense, it was easy, but at the same token, it was very hard. But you can't do it if you don't have the faith to carry you through it.
For sure. How long did the grieving process take, and is it a lifelong thing where you do go back to the closet of memories and deal with grief, or is it something that you, I don't want to say move past, because again, you're saying you always want to remember.
Yeah.
But I mean, for yourself and for your children, like, how long does that initial grieving, like deep guttural grieving process, how long did that last for you? And was it, like you said, it's a little bit easier because you could focus on needing to take care of your children. They needed you. But for maybe in the sense of someone that just has a spouse that they've lost and maybe they don't have kids in the home.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that might.
That would be harder for someone that didn't have kids at home, because the grieving process, I think it varies from person to person. I don't think the deep grieving lasted as long for me, because you got to remember, I have a 16-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. And the 16-year-old made 30 on her ACT test. And she's getting close to graduating high school. And she's preparing for college and what she's going to do as a career. The 11-year-old is trying to figure out life. And what Laura and I used to do, we used to have a game. We'd get in a car, and that was back during the time where Walmarts were building new super centers everywhere. We'd go find a new Walmart, check it out. We stayed busy. And that didn't give us time to grieve, or that didn't allow us to sit around and wallow in our tears, so to speak. Now, there were times when I did that because the kids would go to school, and I would sit there and go, Pam's gone to Walmart. She'll be back in 5 minutes. And then you realize she's not coming back. And then I would get up and go do something, because I had to take my mind off of it. Because I think that's important for somebody that's dealing with grief, is to find something else to focus on. But again, as I said a while ago, you don't want to forget, because Pam and I were married 20 years. That's a big chunk of your life that shapes and molds who you are. That's, we raised 2 kids together. And so, and I'm not one of those kind of people, and I know my oldest daughter probably had more trouble with it than, for example, I did, because I've always said, you see sometimes driving down the road, you'll see people that have a cross where somebody has had a car accident. To me, that's a bad idea, because every time I drive by that, I'm going to be reminded of it. I'm not going to be reminded of the life they lived. I'm going to be remembered what happened to them. So, like, I know Hillary, for example, she used to go a lot to her mother's graveside, and I understand that. I wasn't one of those that kind of did that, because I didn't want to remind her that she's dead. I want to remind her that she's still living, that she's in a better place. And she will never die, because I look at her 2 children and I see her in them. So she's always going to be with us. And that's the beautiful thing about having children, is the fact that their mother's still here, because both of them look a lot like their mother, thank goodness. And, but they also have a lot of her tendencies. They have some of her personality, but they learn from their mother. They have the strength that she had. And so she hasn't gone anywhere,
Right.
as far as the children are concerned. And I also have the knowledge and the joy that she's with God right now.
For sure.
There's days when I'm going through life where, man, I'm sometimes envious of it, because life is hard. Life can be tough. Sometimes it deals you a deck of cards that you don't get a good hand. And you've got to learn how you're going to deal with that. And sometimes it'd be better off. I can understand. I've never been one of those that'd be suicidal. But you can kind of understand when people they can't deal with life. But I'm a joyful person. I know sometimes maybe I don't sound like it, because when you get to talking about those emotional things, it's a different me. But for the most part, I love life. I try to live it to the fullest. I'm living a great one right now. It couldn't be any better. So, would I have the life I had now if Pam hadn't passed away? No, I wouldn't. But I do have this life.
For sure.
And that's not going to change. So, as long as I'm still here, I'm going to make the best of it. And that's probably the best advice I could give to anybody. It's just be yourself and live, because you still are living.
I have one last question. What ways have you seen God's hand on your life after the fact?
I mentioned this, we were talking earlier, and it's a story that I'd say just knowing that He's present. And I had one of those experiences that I was telling y'all about earlier, that sometimes you wonder, is God really real? Because you can't see him. You can see the effects of, like when we're sitting here on the farm, you can see the sun. You can see the beautiful trees, and you can see the birds and the creatures, and there's a God that exists, but that's all you see of it. It's like the wind. You don't see the wind, but you see the effects of the wind. But I was telling this story, and I've told it 1,000 times, and God has reminded me over and over and over that, yes, I exist. I'm here. I'm here for you. And all you've got to do is ask, and I'll give it to you. But after Pam passed away, it was a week after she had passed away. I had to go back to the funeral home, and during the funeral, there was a friend of mine. His daughter sang a song, and the name of the song was "When You Call on Jesus." All things are possible. And but I had gone back to the funeral home, and during I did whatever business I had to do, and I got back in my car, and I turned the radio on, and it was to the very minute of the week before when we had her funeral. And I turned the radio on, and I listened to a lot of Christian contemporary music. And so when I turned the radio on, the very first words I heard from the song that was on the radio were the same songs that Jessica sang at Pam's funeral. And I stopped because I'd had all these thoughts in my mind. What am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? Because it's a week after she'd passed away. How am I going to manage this? And it was like God said, I'm sending you a message. I'm here. And I literally looked up in the sky, and I said, I get it. I get it. You're telling me that everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be all right. But he had also told me that I couldn't do it without him. And he was telling me that message. And there's been times, Marietta, when I've gone through my life where I've not fully did what I promised God I was going to do, that I was going to follow him no matter where he went. And there's been times where I've stepped away from it. There's been times where I've made mistakes, but who hasn't? But I've always come back to him because I know I can't do this without him. But that's what the whole situation with my dad, the whole situation with Pam, I even realized it. We even considered me preaching my mother's funeral. But I don't think I could have done it. I don't think I could emotionally got through it. But as I said, I did do her eulogy. And the thing I said in her eulogy was, I know what kind of person my mother was because of who her children are. Mm. And although I've made mistakes in my life, I know God forgives. But God is different than people. God forgives and he forgets. People don't forget. But I use the fact that God's been with me every step of my life. Even when I wasn't around. But he's always been there. So that's what I've learned from all that. That's what I try to tell people. That you can't do this thing called life without God. You can't do it without people. Because your loved ones, when we had our family reunion out here, we won't call it that, and you were here, that's what I said in my little speech that I got to do beforehand, was that you're here because you're family. That's the most important thing in your life. Because family will not desert you. And it's the same way with God. He will not leave you. So I guess those are the things that will always stay with me.
Yeah. And if someone doesn't have lots of family members, their family could look like their friends to come around them if they're going through a loss.
Well, I got a friend from the former church I used to go to that no matter what I've gone through in my life, he's never been any different to me than he's ever been. He loves me. And he's not even a family member. And he's a guy that told me if we're going to go jump off this cliff, I'd probably go with him. Because I knew he'd be doing it for the right reasons. Mm. But he's just that kind of friend. So yes, there are friends outside family. But family are people that will never, ever leave you. They don't ever leave you. They don't ever leave.
Yeah.
That's important.
So if you could sum all this up to in one sentence to a person that's going through a loss of a loved one, what would you say?
Simply, first thing you do is you get on your hands and knees and you say, God, show me what to do. And you show me the path. You show me the road to go down, and I'll follow. And if I stray, just jerk me back into the middle of the road and we'll keep going, because I can't do it without you.
Amen. Okay, well, I thank y'all so much for joining us today and hearing my cousin Russell's story. Again, if you want to hear his entire story, it'll be linked down below. If this has touched your heart, his entire story is going to touch it even more so. So we thank you so much, and we will see you on the next episode.